Hi everyone, William here with the latest in the Grand Duke Dmitri diary series on YouTube. We are still temporarily in 1908 doing not diary entries, but Dmitri's letter to his sister who'd gotten married that year. This one is actually undated. He only writes 1908. He gives us the place, Haapsalu in Russian, and then just the year, 1908. So that's not very helpful. But if you recall, the last one we did was written on the 31st of August. And Dmitri had just gotten back from visiting his sister in Sweden. And this one was written prior to his visit to Sweden, and so, it was summer. And I said yesterday I would say a little more about the location, and I thought it was in Finland. I stupidly should have looked that up before talking about it at all, but it was in Estonia. And what Dmitri spells or puts down on paper as Haapsalu is Haapsalu. I don't know. It's spelled Haapsalu, and yeah, it was in Estonia. And today's today's text mentions going out to an island, which made me think about Dmitri's 1917 diaries when he was worried about the defense of these islands off of Estonia, which were very important as part of the protection of the capital of Petrograd, and the German Navy was making a run on those islands, and I think they took them. They didn't end up making it all the way to Petrograd. Anyway, kind of interesting. So let's dive into the letter. It has an interesting anecdote about duck hunting. And if you're not interested in duck hunting, and I'm not in particular because I've never done it, it's still the more interesting thing about it to me, as you'll see, is Dmitri's sort of overall view of things. Okay, so here we go. Don't write to me again what you, Maria, my dear little one, ! Don't write to me again what you are doing at home, because I almost burst last time reading your second letter, for which I am very grateful to you. Here I must note that the you is plural, so my assumption would be that he's saying, don't write to me again what you and Wilhelm, your husband, are doing at home, because I almost burst. Okay, going on. I'm looking forward to a pleasant time in Sweden. I don't know anything about the date of my departure because something strange has happened with Uncle Nicky and Alex. They haven't responded to any letters, not to Auntie's and now not to mine, though the matter is quite important. I wrote specifically about Sweden. I hunt here as often as I can. This is a highly praised place, but there are very few ducks. Right now, for example, my hand is shaking because I got up at 2:30 in the morning and I only slept 2 hours on the boat. It's really funny. All our efforts were in vain. We didn't see a single duck. Oh yes, one rather funny thing happened, which promised to end very badly, and that is indeed what happened. I went with Joseph, the valet, he was with us in Haapsalu, to an island where there was supposed to be hunting, and suddenly I turned around and saw some kind of sailboat close to the shore, and fire appeared, and then a strong blow, like a cannon blast. I thought the boat was on guard and had mistaken us for poachers and fired at us, but Joseph said the explosion was in the blank, not on the boat. Well, we calmed down at that point. Then after we'd circled the island and were on our way back, the man who had come with us because we were using his sailboats came up to us looking terribly offended and unwell. Sorry, terribly upset and unwell. After a long conversation, it turned out that the explosion was none other than his own shotgun, which, when he fired the right barrel, gave a shock that caused the other cartridge to explode. He suffered a terrible blow to the shoulder, and the gun slipped and hit his forehead, producing a terrible lump. Well, anyway, that's enough about that, except it was funny because the poor man kept muttering to himself, "Phoo, what a lousy gun, no good, no good going off like that." And it was all completely serious. Hugs, your little brother. Okay, this is very affectionate. You know, they don't usually call each other by these names, little brother, and he calls her my dear little one. But apparently she had sent him some funny letters, and I guess that was what he was responding to. And he said, "You better not send me another one like that because I burst." He doesn't say burst into laughter, but presumably he didn't burst into tears, so it must have been something funny. Okay, so this trip to Sweden, apparently it had been planned. The Swedish royal family were expecting him at some point, but the problem was that it hadn't been planned in advance with Nicholas and Alexandra, and they were not now responding to letters. Apparently, Ella wrote to them. Ella is the auntie to whom Dmitri refers, and apparently Dmitri wrote to them. Well, not apparently, he says he did, and he wrote specifically about Sweden. Well, why was that necessary? As far as I know, the emperor, and especially not the emperor and empress, didn't have to approve every time a Grand Duke went or Grand Duchess went abroad. Maybe they did. I don't know. I've never come across that. But what I'm thinking here is that Dmitri was technically still in their custody. They had handed him and Maria over to Sergei and Ella, and then after Sergei died, to Ella, and then when Maria married, Dmitri was still in Ella's custody, and she was still responsible for him. But technically, officially, Nicholas and Alexandra were in loco parentis. They were the parents of Dmitri, and they bore ultimate responsibility. So Ella had him sort of on sufferance. I don't mean to say that she didn't want to have him. She wanted to raise him the way Sergei wanted him to be raised. That was the most important thing to her. But apparently, because he was technically their ward, they had to give their explicit approval for him to go to Sweden. And Ella would not be going, so he'd be going on his own with General Laming. And yeah, I mean, obviously they did give their approval because he did end up going. But it's, as he says, it's strange that they hadn't, since it was kind of a pressing concern, and that both he and Ella wrote to them. It's kind of strange that they didn't respond to that right away. Anyway, maybe they were on their way, maybe they were out on their annual cruise in the Gulf of Finland, or on their way to the Crimea or something like that. Unfortunately, Dmitri doesn't tell us what he thought what was going on. He just characterizes it as something strange has happened with Uncle Nicky and Alex. Uncle Nicky, that's expected. He doesn't say Aunt Alex, just Uncle Nicky and Alex, so that's kind of interesting. I don't know. I mean, maybe just why bother putting the aunt in? Okay, so yeah, he always liked bird hunting. Not an avid hunter, certainly not an avid hunter of larger animals, but he liked bird hunting, and so he's here. He's 17 years old. He's with his aunt, who's taking the waters, who's in poor health. What's he going to do? He doesn't have, any other young people his own age. I always find that a bit striking, that, partly because the family had been so isolated at Sergei's own desire, I think, in Moscow. He and Maria, they hadn't had a chance to make really close friends. They were pretty isolated, and now, since they What am I saying? Since Dmitri was so much sort of under Ella's thumb, we saw in the letter yesterday that he was saying that he only knew young Felix Yusupov superficially and would like to get to know him. And he really doesn't seem to have had a lot of peers, a lot of friends his own age. And certainly there weren't any on this trip, and he wasn't out getting to know, Estonian boys and girls from aristocratic families, or those visiting from other places, visiting the spa town. Anyway, here I am rambling. He is out duck hunting with Joseph. So I wonder if this is the same Joseph. I would think so. He mentions a Joseph in his diaries in 1906 who was a servant, I guess a valet. I don't know if it was his particular valet who dressed him and that sort of thing. In the 1906 diary entry, I think Joseph had been searching for his cat who had gone missing. Anyway, yeah, this was probably the same Joseph, and he was telling, he puts in parentheses so that Maria will know, the Joseph I mean is Joseph the valet, and he came with us to Haapsalu. So he probably was Dmitri's personal valet. Okay, so they're off, and obviously there was more than one boat. They weren't duck hunting from a boat, like a rowboat, which was the first thing I was thinking of. Well, how can he be sleeping 2 hours on a rowboat, even though it's summer? No, apparently they had more than one boat, and they were doing their hunting on the island, on shore. So he did get a chance to sleep a little bit. And yeah, lambing didn't go along for whatever reason. It was just Dmitri and Joseph. And so they're wandering around this island themselves, looking for ducks, looking for a good place to hunt. They don't see a single duck. But, almost immediately when they get on shore, apparently there's this explosion. They see flames, or they see a flash, and there's this explosion. And so Dmitri immediately thinks that someone is shooting at them because they've been mistaken for poachers. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, so it turns out to be this guy who had took a shot at God knows what, since Dmitri and Joseph didn't see any ducks. And yeah, the misfire, and it hit him in the forehead. Yeah, okay, I don't know why I'm re-narrating all of this, since you already have it from Dmitri, but what's interesting is this last little paragraph, when he says it was funny because the poor man kept muttering to himself, "Ooh, what a lousy gun, no good, no good." Yeah, okay, that is precisely his sense of humor, and I don't think it's him being mean. There's a little bit to the 17-year-old boy thing, but that it's the kind of thing that a teenage boy would find funny. But he does say the poor man, but it just, all his life he had such let's say, an appreciation for the ridiculous or the absurd. He just relished anything that struck him as absurd. And this, was obviously one of those occasions. I do hope the man was all right, for God's sake. It's interesting the way Dmitri puts it. The man is muttering to himself, "Lousy gun, no good, no good." But Dmitri then says at the end, and it was all completely serious, so I'm not sure how to interpret that. But apparently all was well then later with the man, because, yeah, I don't think Dmitri would have been callous enough to laugh at it if it had been a serious injury. Okay, so I forgot to look and see what we'll do next time, but it will be another one of these 1908 letters. So anyway, I hope you're enjoying those, and I hope you'll come back for that. Bye.